Welcome to our Recovery and Reentry Initiatives breakout session. I am Kathy Zook, the ARC Program Manager for Eastgate Regional Council of Governments here in Youngstown, Ohio. And I'm really pleased that we have three excellent speakers to share with you some of their success stories and work that they're doing in this very important Recovery and Reentry Initiatives program. So each of our speakers does have a more lengthy bio that you can find at the bottom of your video box screen and the agenda. So I'm just going to give some brief highlights, and then you can just look at that at your leisure. Now, each speaker is going to present for probably about 10 minutes, and we would welcome you to use the chat box to ask your questions, because at the end of our session, we are going to have an opportunity for them to speak with you, and so your questions would be important. Feel free to do that at any time. And then I'd like to begin by introducing our first speaker. We have Michelle Scaggs, who is the Manager of Human Resources for Bellisio Foods. This is a large manufacturing company located in Jackson, Ohio. And like many of us, this region has been impacted by the opioid epidemic. So Michelle does a really good job of combining her manufacturing background and human resources to utilize executive coaching techniques to develop organization leaders. So with that, please help me welcome Michelle Scaggs.
Okay, so who we are. So the three images there, the one over to the left, obviously the state of Ohio, but I really wanted to share the red dot and point the arrow there to show you where we're located, one of the most southern points of the state. The middle image is a brief capture of Jackson. And then up at the top right is our most recent aerial view of Bellisio Foods. So addiction. How are we impacted? So let me tell you a little bit about our organization first before we get started. Bellisio is a frozen food manufacturing organization located in Jackson, Ohio, as I mentioned. It is a small town about 27 miles southeast of Chillicothe with a population of 6,000 and a county population of 30,000. The 1,200 people that we do employ, the majority come from this demographic, and the remaining employees come from a 30-mile radius. Not new news to anyone that there is no sector of any of our communities that are not impacted by addictions of drugs and or alcohol. And yes, Jackson's no different. Not to mention, we are personally impacted in our own families and homes. In 2019, an average yearly total of 107 opioid pills per resident were distributed over a 7-year period in this rural county deep in the Appalachia. Substance abuse can be especially hard to combat in rural communities due to limited resources for prevention and recovery. So addiction, how are we impacted? First of all, unemployability. So for example, I asked my recruiting manager the other day, if we received 20 applicants, how many would not pass a drug test? Astonishingly, she stated approximately 7. 7 out of 20 would not pass the drug test. And that is confirmed positives. You also have inconclusive test results, which requires a different validation process. An applicant would have to contact their MRO to confirm the medication identified in the urine was approved by a doctor. Nonetheless, it's a roll of the dice, for lack of better terms. Crime rates increase. Sure they do. If I'm trying to get a job and cannot, whether I'm trying to support my family, my addiction and habit, possibly I'm going to steal for it. Absenteeism rates increase. Employees with addictions generally are unreliable. I'll use myself for example. I don't ever remember someone saying, well, that Michelle has a substance abuse problem, but she never misses a day of work, right? So this is a domino effect. And the next thing that it affects is it decreases productivity. The most important impact is safety risks to others. People with addictions are more likely to get hurt than people who do not. And in fact, they are more likely to be hurt seriously because of how their judgment, vision, and coordination are impacted. Okay, so what are the needs? So all people's needs are different, right? As we survey our workforce and sit on community boards, events, and meetings, we are completely aligned with the needs identified. And recovery does not look the same for everybody. Needs are all over the place, and not just someone going through recovery. So, transportation. Transportation has been a big deal over the last 2 years, we're finding. So for our organization, this was a quick win for us. We partnered with the local YMCA, put a van in place, and now give the ability for employees to be transported to work who don't have vehicles. Child care. So child care is an initiative that is on the forefront for us. For example, if we have a single mom with 3 kids and she works second shift, so if she works first shift, the kids are in school, right, during the school year. With COVID, no one was in school. So she could probably get child care during the day. Second shift, where she would have the opportunity to probably make more money, there isn't childcare available. And that's a big struggle for people. Career development. I'm really proud of the programs that we have in place here at Bellisio. You can come in entry level or as a general utility worker, and we can develop you. We like to refer to it as growing our own, and you can have very successful long-term employment here. Another need, housing. We have an employee who was recovering from alcohol. He and his wife both work here, actually, and doing well through recovery. Housing is tough. We don't have a lot of housing available. He and his wife are living in a camper in a local campground with 3 young children. The problem is right now he has the money, he can afford the housing, but the housing isn't available. However, if the housing was available, his background check does not allow him to get into housing. Real challenges. Some additional things, the needs, peer support, community support, positive influence, and lastly, employers willing to take the time. What I mean by that is investing the time in people who are going through these types of journeys. Okay. So how can we help? Quite frankly, let's treat everyone the same. In other words, hold people accountable. Praise when the opportunity arises. Coach and mentor, no matter if an individual is going through recovery or not, right? Treat everyone the same. We want to continue to attend local, county, and regional meetings. We have an HR representative on my team that goes to drug court every week, right? Trying to identify folks that may need some help becoming gainfully employed. Stay connected and partner with other organizations on specific projects related to workforce development and recovery. Encourage others to advocate for change. There are strengths in numbers, as we all well know. And Bellisio has been a core team member for the Ohio Valley Recovery to Work cohort, where we are building a recovery to work ecosystem for the region by joining forces and sharing resources. And lastly, simply educate ourselves and others. Reentry. So how can we make an impact? Well, good health is so important for all people, no matter the individual situation. That's why we have our own healthcare facility directly across from the building, allowing the individuals the opportunity to make a good living. There was a time when Bellisio would receive a background check for an applicant, and we only looked at it black or white, accepted or declined. As we evolve as a business and a community, background checks are reviewed with an individual situational approach. For example, if a person is attempting to re-enter the workforce after recovery, let's think about what their background check may look like. Possible suspension of license, probably, maybe. Possible charge of drugs and or drug paraphernalia, maybe. But if we see that someone is attempting to turn their life around, why do we want to prevent them from gainful employment, a positive lifestyle change, and an overall contributor to the community? Um, in closing, please ask yourself, how can I make an impact on someone's life today, tomorrow, and in the future? Again, thank you so much for letting me present to you today.
Thank you, Michelle. That was some wonderful information. I'm really pleased to hear the good works that you're doing. And this is a perfect segue coming from an employer's perspective and now moving into our next speaker, which is Jeffrey Magada of FlyingHIGH, to see how these two are compatible. But Jeffrey is the founder and executive director of FlyingHIGH Inc., which is located in Youngstown, Ohio. And FlyingHIGH works with individuals who have substance use disorder, as well as formerly incarcerated individuals, to help them secure the skills they need to maintain that recovery to work. And Jeff has made it his mission to work with people to develop their potential and discover their destiny. So Jeffrey, please share your story with us today. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Kathy. And good afternoon, everybody. I'm so pleased to be able to share a little bit about what we're doing here. And my apology if you hear sirens in the background. We're located right in the heart of downtown Youngstown, and sometimes a lot of fire trucks and other things go by. But I'm very pleased to talk to you very shortly here about some of the things that we have found to be effective in working with that recovery population and getting them into gainful employment. So first of all, just a very brief background on our Professional Development Center. So that is a licensed school, a technical school in the state of Ohio. And it was specifically created for individuals with employment barriers, meaning individuals with recovery, with the barrier of addiction or incarceration, and things that may become stumbling blocks to them, gaining employment. So we specifically set this up with them in mind. We wanted to set a system up that the most vulnerable among us could walk through and get to their desired result. So one of the things is we have accelerated vocational programs. And those accelerated vocational programs are there because particularly if it is an addiction that also has a criminal felony, okay, that credential is crucial to getting that person into something more than a low-paying job. So it was important that we offered skills credentialing. But the issue was our population don't have 4 years or 2 years, right? They're coming out of, recovery. So a lot of them have families. Sometimes they were the breadwinner in the family, and they needed to move into employment. And so that accelerated training was exactly for that purpose. So our longest program is 15 weeks, and that's our welding program. And so that gives them an opportunity to get that skills credential, which can overcome any of that criminal background they have, and also get a license certificate in there that they can show to an employer that they have that credential. So we started our school back in 2016. That's when we launched those programs. But in 2017, we expanded that, last year, 2020, we expanded that into a welcome center, because what was happening in our area here is that we have a lot of jobs now in Northeast Ohio. And Youngstown is situated in Mahoning County, which abuts Western Pennsylvania there. And we've had some very good news that We have the Altium battery plant that is now here in the county just north of us. We have TJ Maxx, which is a distribution center for all the TJ Maxx and Home Goods and Marshalls. We have Macy's expanding. We have Lordstown Electric Truck. So it's really becoming what's called Voltage Valley. And so with that, there's immediately 2,000 new jobs with another 4,000 jobs coming in the very near future, not to mention all the jobs that the current employers have. So we wanted to pull in more individuals and get them prepared and qualified for the many jobs. And I'll talk more about that prepare and qualify process. So what's real important that we learned is that we have job developers or business account executives on board, and they go and they talk to employers to see what the qualifications are they need, how many open job positions there are, but most importantly, what are the disqualifiers? So a lot of employers will have disqualifiers, for example, for criminal records that have to do with addiction. And we want to know that beforehand, because as we're moving that recovery population through our process, we're not going to put them in front of an employer that has already a disqualifier, right? We don't want to set them up to fail. So that pre-communication with that employer is crucial. And it also allows us to know what they're looking for in any kind of pre-employment training. Do they want them to have an OSHA certificate? Do they need them to have tow motor training? And those are things that we can do prior to presenting to that individual, to that employer, to make them most competitive for that position. So that job developer is crucial in that pre-communication with those employers to find out exactly what they're looking for. What you're looking at here is what we call the Big Five. And we were able to obtain this information because we went out and talked to employers and said, what are you looking for in a good job candidate? And they told us, bring candidates to us that have skills credential, a valid driver's license, reliable transportation, can pass a drug screen, and some form of professionalism skills. And that is what they were focused on. So really, the addiction, the past addiction, the criminal backgrounds were not the focus. It's bring us people that have these things. And that really became our mission. So everybody that comes through the Professional Development Center, we're working with them to make sure that they have these 5 things, and in some cases only 4 of the 5, because some employers do not require the skills credential, but we're working with them to do that. And as we work with them, we find out that there are, why don't you have a driver's license? Well, I have court fines. Well, I have reimbursement, reinstatement or reimbursement fees I owe to the court. I have judgments against me. So what we found was we needed a vast array of support services that we could offer to that individual, help them overcome that barrier, get them started along that pathway. And they're meeting with the case manager all during this time, putting together a customized employment plan. Here's the barrier. Here's the opportunity to overcome that barrier. And here's when we're looking to get you into employment. So some of the things you see on the screen, I hope you could see them because they're very important. Help with driver's licenses, help with reinstatement fees, birth certificates, right? Help with any kind of tuition that they may need, help with transportation, vehicles. I think we've purchased well over 30 vehicles in the past 3 years for individuals. Some of the other things very quickly here is we do a career match assessment, which is very important, particularly for people who are trying to reinvent their lives, is we want to make sure they're getting into the right industry that is suitable for their talents and their personality. And then on this slide here, very important, and I think Michelle has alluded to this and what she's doing with her company, but it really is, we're in a day where we have to create some very unique employment pathways, particularly with people that have these kind of barriers. Because what we found is that it's not necessarily productive to just put them right into a job. Okay, it's one thing to obtain it, it's another thing to maintain it. And sometimes what we've seen is that addiction community, they get a little money in their pocket, right? They don't, and all of a sudden that's a trigger, maybe for them go back into relapse, right? Or they start doing really well and they don't believe they deserve it. So there's a self-sabotage mechanism that kicks in. So what we've learned is that it's better for them to be emotionally and spiritually ready to take on that fight of life, if you will, and be prepared so that when they get that job, they're able to maintain it and keep on that upward trajectory. So what we've put together is these unique employment pathways that take them, if you will, ankle deep, knee deep, waist deep, so that they gradually move through the process. And emotionally, they stay balanced and they stay tied to the recovery supports. They're talking to a sponsor, they're going to meetings, they have a home group, they're tied into that support, that recovery support community so that they can make it through the process. And real quickly, I'll just tell you about one of them, and that is our Working Toward the Future program. And we have a urban farm where we'll start everybody in recovery at. And they're working with their case manager and they work on the farm. And it's a great thing because that farm is growing produce that then goes back out into the community, into food deserts, all throughout the Mahoning Valley for people who have limited access. So they're giving back to the community. But while they're there, they're earning training stipends. And those training stipends go into what we call a purpose account. And that purpose account is used to overcome any barriers of their past. Help to pay those court fines, get the driver's license, pay tuition, get transportation. And so it has been a tremendous program to allow them to work acclimate while they're putting money aside to overcome those barriers. And then we'll move them into employment and to accelerated training. And then lastly, I just wanted to list some of the partners that we work with, because it really is all about connecting people to the resources to overcome their employment barriers so they can become marketable for employment. And what you learn in this process of workforce development with recovering individuals is it takes a tremendous amount of resources. And I mean a lot of manpower and resources. And so you want to leverage everything you can in the community. For example, we have Home for Good and Dress to Succeed. Home for Good has a lot of things to overcome criminal backgrounds. Dress to Succeed provides all the professional clothing. So we're linked into everything we can to make that person as marketable as possible. So thank you so much. I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you, Jeff. Excellent. So glad to hear the good news of the Youngstown region having increased employment opportunities and becoming the focus for the Voltage Valley. Certainly the training that you're doing at the Professional Development Center will work hand in hand with those employment opportunities. So thank you. And then now at this time, I'd like to introduce our last speaker, who is Jennifer Seifert. Jennifer is our Executive Director at SAOP, which is Survivor Advocacy Outreach Program. And this is a dual rape crisis center and domestic violence program. This does serve 8 Appalachian counties in Southeast Ohio. And in addition, Jennifer conducts and oversees the violent prevention programs in regional schools, organizations, and businesses. So we're really happy to hear what she can share with us today. So please welcome Jennifer Seifert.
Thank you so much, Kathy, and thank you so much for having me. So like Kathy mentioned, my name's Jennifer Seifert, and I'm the director of the Survivor Advocacy Outreach Program, which is a mouthful, so we say SAOP for short. And we cover 8 counties in Southeast Ohio. And we believe that everyone deserves a life free of sexual assault, domestic violence, and human trafficking. And we do this in our communities by educating about healthy relationships and survivors' choices once they've been assaulted, and empowering our communities and our clients to enact change towards these lives free without trauma. And today I'm going to tell you a little bit about our new social enterprise division of our nonprofit called New Leaf Justice Enterprises. But I'm going to start off with a story, because if you're wondering why is a domestic violence program or rape crisis center in this specific panel, well, I'm going to help illuminate that just a little bit, but I'm going to start with a story. So imagine you're sitting on the bank of a river and you're fishing. And maybe you have a friend with you and you're having a great time, but then you look out in the water and you see someone coming down the river drowning. Well, of course, being the good human that you are, you jump in, you swim out, you get the person, you bring them back to the shore. My goodness, aren't we relieved that person's been saved? Well, just as you're about ready to cast your lure back in, you see another person. So you jump in and you grab that person and you bring them to shore. And then all of a sudden you look out and you see 3 more. We're always going to need those folks in our society, right? The ones who go out into the river and bring people to the shore. But if you're anything like me, you might sit there and think, once you've had a minute to catch your breath, why the heck are so many people falling in the river in the first place? And so in the public health field, and I apologize if any of you were in public health because you've heard this story a million times before, but that's what we do. We think, how do we go upstream? How do we go upstream and try and figure out why are there so many people drowning in this kind of metaphorical river? And so in this case, you go upstream and you see that there's a footbridge that goes over the bridge or over the river, but there's a big hole in it. And that's what's causing people to fall in. And so you think, well, hey, why don't we repair this hole? And then we won't have as many people falling in the river in the first place. Okay? And so in this metaphor, when we think about violence prevention, we are the metaphorical folks that are jumping in the water and pulling people out, right? So when someone has experienced sexual violence or domestic violence, that's our role. But other people that are on the riverbank might be first responders, mental health professionals, really even citizens, because sometimes when our family members experience trauma, we might be the ones that come help them kind of out of the metaphorical river, if you will. But when you think about relational trauma, and I use relational trauma as a very broad kind of catch-all for sexual violence, domestic violence, human trafficking, stalking. The holes in the footbridge, what do you think those are? I'll give you a second to think. So someone who has a history of trauma or adverse childhood experiences is more likely to experience sexual violence, domestic violence, human trafficking, and stalking. Unemployment is a hole in the footbridge. Housing instability, poverty, lack of living wage employment, communities that support rigid gender norms and sexist policies, and substance use disorder. But substance use disorder is one that's a little tricky because folks who experience trauma are more likely to also abuse substances as part of what we often call a maladaptive trauma response. So folks are trying to manage the adverse effects of experiencing that trauma, and often they turn to substances. So when you think about trauma and substance use disorder, they're often what we call co-occurring and almost circular. So one is a risk factor for the other and makes the other more likely to be experienced by that same person. So the connection between trauma and substance use disorder is really inseparable. So here at SAOP, it's been 3 years ago, but in January, we were sitting around our board of directors really thinking, what is our upstream approach going to look like? So I oversee all of our prevention programming, and we do bystander intervention training in schools, healthy relationships. We do support groups with youth, LGBT youth, gender nonconforming youth, to provide them with some supportive services. So when I talk about going upstream, I'm talking about, thinking about what are programs, really kind of keeping people from falling into the river in the first place. And so when we thought, how are we going to prevent, sexual violence, domestic violence, we came up with New Leaf Justice Enterprises. And this is a move upstream, not only to prevent relational violence and domestic violence, human trafficking and stalking, but also a move upstream to prevent substance use disorder. But a way you can think about some of these different things is that much like rivers have tributaries, right? They're fed by other rivers and other, streams upstream. That's how you could think about substance use disorder and trauma. So New Leaf Justice Enterprise is a social enterprise division of our nonprofit, And it's based on Thistle Farm. So if y'all are familiar with Thistle Farm in Nashville, Tennessee, it is a social enterprise that has been doing phenomenal work with survivors of sex work and human trafficking and other types of abuse. And we are now a sister organization of theirs. And so that helps us with all of their programmatic information, but then they also help with a lot of other amazing support services to get your social enterprise off the ground. And so our New Leaf is going to work with survivors, of course, but survivors of not only trauma, but also substance use disorder, and incarceration, because of the connection between those three experiences. And so New Leaf Justice Enterprises, like Thistle Farm, has three components of what we like to talk about as the three legs of stability. It provides living wage employment, free housing with no authority in the home, and supportive services or community connection. So free living wage employment. That is employment that, of course, pays a living wage, but is also flexible and in tune with people's trauma response. So some folks, after experiencing trauma, might choose to be very vocal and talk openly about their experience, and that could be part of their healing, whereas other folks don't want to share very much about their experience. Both of those responses are totally normal and ones that we want to support. But that also means that when we think through living wage employment, we have to think of like several different opportunities. The free housing with no authority in the home, that is, think not like a shelter situation or more of an institutional style arrangement where there's someone that's always on staff, kind of not trying to be kind of a watch person, but that's how it functionally ends up being, right? For some people's experience, it feels like they're kind of being watched and always on display. So this model uses free housing in individual units that are very comfortable, that are homey. You might have a roommate or not. It just depends on how the housing shakes out. And finally, the supportive services. So this is access to counseling, therapy, advocacy, case management. And so this is our organization's wheelhouse. This is what we've been really doing for a long time and where we have kind of the most experience. But the community connection is absolutely imperative, and that's why it's part of the program. So where are we in New Leaf? Well, we are launching the program in about 6 months, where we hope to have our first resident. And the living wage employment piece, we are going to open 2 New Leaf marketplaces, one here in Nelsonville, Ohio, and one in Gloucester. We already have the spaces and the staff for those locations, and we're going to offer grab-and-go food to start, Dirty Girl Coffee, which is another social enterprise in our area, and then ice cream. But in addition, we're also going to have a line of Leaf branded products that our survivors might make. And this is for those folks who aren't really comfortable being kind of the front face of this enterprise. So that's where we are on the living wage employment side. With the free housing side, so we have some very exciting and well-defined partnerships with Capstone Realty and LaRue Properties. And so they are helping us acquire the housing, and we are up to 11 units currently. And those are 2 to 3 bedroom units. And then finally, the supportive services side, again, like I mentioned, we already have those pieces in place, at least for advocacy, but we also have partners with Integrated Services, our local Ohio Means Jobs organization to provide workforce development services and things of that nature. So we're really excited to be able to start sharing the news. We're really excited about this enterprise. We really only started exploring it in earnest in January. And I keep telling people, I feel like I lit a match, but didn't realize that we were surrounded by gasoline, because so many people are hungry for initiatives like this. And we're just so thrilled, but it has been a little disorienting in some ways for everything to have fallen into place so quickly. But I think a lot of people have had a lot of time to sit and think about what do we want to arise out of the ashes of 2020. And this is certainly one of our organization's initiatives. And so I would say to anyone here who is interested in maybe going down this path of trying to increase access to either services or living wage employment or housing, if working with folks in active trauma or that are in recovery feels like too much or too big of a lift for your organization now, you can always go upstream, okay? And upstream things might be flexible work environments, paying living wage, offering supportive services to your workers. So if anyone wants to talk more about ways we can go upstream and benefit or ideally divert folks from ever falling in the river in the first place, I'd be thrilled to have that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was some wonderful information, and I love how you visually take us up a river and then rising from the ashes. So that was a really good way to share your story. Thank you so much. And at this time, I would like to invite our other panelists, Jeffrey Magada and Michelle Scaggs, to engage in some conversation. I think we can share a little more with our viewers today. And we have looking for questions in the chat, so feel free to post some questions. Right now we only have one, but I certainly have some backup here, and I know our presenters can eagerly share some more information too. But we have a question from Gina Collinsworth, and she's asking, Michelle, can you talk a little more about the Bellisio Transportation Program? How did you get that started, and who are the community partners?
Sure, I would love to. It's a very interesting story. So we've again identified that it was there was a huge need, and so initially we were paying an outside vendor. And then when we started to look at the expenses on an annual basis, we were thinking, oh my goodness, we could actually purchase our own van. So, our HR leader in Minneapolis, which is where our corporate office is, her husband actually owns a dealership. So it's nice to know who owns dealerships so we could get a very good deal on it. And then we sent one of our HR representatives to Minneapolis to pick it up. It's a very nice van. Before COVID, it holds 14 comfortably. We're still under COVID protocol, so we can't put everyone in it. But we partnered with the YMCA. And what that did for us is we provided the van, and it gave an opportunity for 3 jobs for drivers. So we pick we'll find where's the need, and we'll identify what shift, or we'll try to adjust the shifts. So if there's a route that is consistent with all of those details, start time, are you in Jackson, are you in Wellston, which are some surrounding towns, and then we just make it happen, and we charge them $2 a trip, so they get $2 to get transportation to work.
Thank you. That sounds really good. That reminds me of my old transportation days. That's where I started public service. So scheduling, I can relate. That can be a nightmare. But each of you in your presentations talked about like support services, transportation, housing, and critical things that many of us may take for granted as we get ready to go to work. We know we have a car, and we have dependable employment. Many of your folks are struggling to get that normalcy back in their life. So let me ask you, each of you, and feel free to whoever wants to answer, what are the typical employment barriers that recovering clients have?
take a shot at that one. And ladies, you can add to me here. So, driver's licenses and reliable transportation. First, many times when you have individuals that are reintegrating from recovery, there's a lack of money there, okay? And there has been a lot of burned bridges, because of that addiction. So there's a lack of those support services. So just basic things as the driver's license. And again, that barrier may be there because they have court fines or fees or judgments that are against them legally, so their license is suspended. So we really found that out quickly, that transportation. And what do employers want most, right? They want reliable people, right? And that's directly tied to their ability to have, transportation. So we have really worked with, of course, providing that transportation initially, but then we want them to be self-sufficient. And that's why we moved into the model of helping them to repair, if they did have a vehicle, repair that, and then even help them to purchase vehicles as they're putting money away in that purpose account. But in the meantime, we're working with them toward, getting those court fines, custody, child support, all those things in line where their license can be freed up. And so that's a big thing. The other thing is housing. I can mention, and maybe some of my colleagues could speak to that, because a lot of times if you're coming out of residential or 3.1 facility, you're looking for a recovery housing setting, or somewhere where you're going to be around others that are going to maintain sobriety and are going with the same goals you're trying to achieve. So that is important to have those things in place.
Okay.
Yes, I can add to that. No, it's everything you just said. It's transportation. It is housing. Those are big challenges. But when we do get them in the door, some additional challenges, I think, are all of the appointments and the process through the journey. You're right. You have probationary appointments, and you still have some court appointments, and so there are a lot of things that come along with it. For Bellisio, we try to understand those needs and challenges prior to onboarding the employee.
And let me ask this to you, because you're all working with individuals that are trying to overcome some type of crisis, whether it's through substance use disorder or domestic violence or things that have happened in your past. How do you engage, or what recommendations could you say for to engage employers who might be hesitant to hire an individual who's come from a background of incarceration or substance abuse or trauma? So what benefit would the employer have by somewhat taking a chance on an individual that has come back through your backgrounds?
Well, I spoke about that, and we are very passionate about that here at Bellisio Foods. So we do look at them individually. Again, I said we used to do them, they were just black and white, accepted or declined. But we need more businesses and employers, I'm not going to say take a risk, but willing to take the time, right, to help and engage employees to get back into the workforce after recovery. And so I think that's extremely important. And even if we have 10 that are coming through and one is successful, that's worth celebrating. So.
Yeah, I concur on that. What we've learned too is that for the most part, employers are not social workers, right? And nor do they need to be. And this is why I think, Michelle and what her company is doing is so great and so unique, because she's really trying to meet people where they are, But I've never had a call, Kathy, from somebody who says, Jeff, do you have 5 good addicts you could send me to work on the line today? Or 5 felons, you got 5 felons to send me. What I mean is that they call me and ask me, do you have any good job candidates? So what we try to do is, number one, we're going to understand if they have disqualifiers. But number two, all the focus is on those big 5 that we talked about. And my response is, well, I have somebody that's got a driver's license, reliable transportation, can pass a drug screen, and has professionalism skills. And the focus, and that is really where we get the minds of our students and clients that come through, is let's work on those. Can't do anything about the past anymore, but this is going to mean everything to your future. And it's amazing how many businesses are willing to give people second and third chances if they have seen that they're making those steps and you know, they're ready to go. They'll give them a chance. So.
Yeah, that's great. And I would offer, and not to problematize your question, Kathy, but I would say employers are already, if you're running a business, you are working with survivors, and there are folks in recovery. The data are clear. 1 in 3 women, 1 in 7 men are survivors of sexual violence. Domestic violence, similar trends. And the difference is shifting your mindset to being a workplace that is going to not just accept, but embrace, right, what might come with the fact that everybody comes to work with a history, right? We aren't just workers, little cogs in a machine. I mean, we come with histories, we come with personalities, we come with skills, and we like to weed out the good stuff, right? We want your experiences that are good. We want your great work history. We want that, but we don't want to deal with the bad stuff, you know? And to me, I think that it's sitting through thinking about, okay, I am really going to engage with not only the good that people bring to the workplace, but also the histories that are going to impact their success here. And I would encourage anyone to look into trauma-informed organizations. It's a fantastic foundation to start that work based on the assumption that folks, you are already working with survivors of substance use disorder and trauma. But is your workplace an environment that people feel like they can talk about it? I mean, that's another piece, is the stigma associated. So, you know, one really progressive and amazing thing that current employers could do is start having conversations or offering some services to see if folks take it up. So I just want to say it might not be a big, like, okay, we're going to work with, you know, trauma and recovery folks now. It's like, they're already there, right? It's figuring out how to really embrace supporting your staff.
Absolutely. And I think, Jeff, you said it well when you said an employer really wants someone they can depend on, who has the skills that they can to do the job and is reliable. So this is the information you guys are bringing forward. I think it is so vital. You know, during the pandemic, we were all kind of in a bubble because we weren't really out and about like we were, you know, prior to that. So discussing these items, I think is critical to our healthy workforce that is so vital to our Appalachian region. So you talked a little bit too about incarceration, and Jennifer, we had discussions prior to where you said that, you know, oftentimes the trauma can lead down the path to incarceration. So maybe to you and to Jeff, could you talk a little bit about what your efforts are doing with the incarcerated individual, one, to prevent them from going down that path, or what you do after they have been released and trying to, you know, do their best to be a productive citizen again?
You go, Jeff.
Okay, right. Okay, I'll start. So I think, you know, one of the lessons learned, you know, and we have really assimilated this as a best practice. And I know Jennifer can speak to this and all the, you know, kids and clients and, you know, that she works with. But we don't want to rush them through a process, okay? And we think, you know, that, okay, if we get somebody a job that solves everything, right? It does somewhat financially, but you got to be able to hold to that, you know, that position there and be able to balance the rest of your life. And when you're coming out of addiction, it is important to understand that things are out of balance, right? You're used to your impulses and pursuing that addiction. That addiction is craving you every day. You're chasing, they call it chasing. And so you're just used to doing things impulsively without really using cognitive thinking about consequences, okay? And thinking about how it has a long-term effect on your future and the people that love you and their future. So it's important that we do not rush the process, okay? And we may think we're doing a good thing. You know, hey, they got out of rehab, I got them a job. and it is a good thing. But what I'm saying is what we've learned is that let's make sure they're emotionally ready. Now, how do you do that? What are the signs that someone's ready? Well, it really is consistency. And you see consistency in their life. They're showing up for meetings. They're showing up for appointments. There's some self-initiative there, okay? And then, that equates to, right, what an employer looks for, reliability. So you'll start to see that 1-2 on their part, and then you need to see it over a period of time. And I think that really is what we've seen is the main thing when we know someone's ready now. Okay, let's move you forward here. Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we at SAOP do trauma empowerment groups in local residential treatment programs and also in our regional jail systems. And the point of that is because being incarcerated is its own type of trauma. I'm just going to lay that out there. And so we go and intercept folks when they're in that stage as best we can to try and provide support while incarcerated. But we here at SAOP are kind of the thinking, and why I was delayed pulling it up is because I was trying to find this gentleman's name. But if anybody hasn't seen Johan Hari's TED Talk about addiction, and that our ideas about addiction are kind of very individual, right? We think that it's an individual issue, it's individual choice, and there is certainly some genetic factors and things that will influence someone's likelihood of experiencing addiction. But in this sense, it's a lot about the environment, what surrounds that person, right? What type of environment, what type of neighborhood even is this person living with? And if you've seen that TED Talk, he really emphasizes that he's like, it's not about addiction. The opposite of sobriety, or the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety. The opposite is connection, And so when you think about trauma, experiencing trauma and addiction, they're fundamentally isolating activities. So our orientation is we need to change that environment, right? We have to provide that support, reconnect people, restore their roots, and turn over a new leaf. Did you see? I did that. So that's why we have the New Leaf Enterprise in there, because it's about connection. And so we try and start that connection as soon, even while people are incarcerated, when they're doing intense recovery, and then ultimately to try to reconnect them and integrate them with sober communities and whatever that looks like.
That's good. And Jen, that was so good, because what you just said there is you just explained why we have recovery housing. You just explained why we have our Grow Urban Farm. See, so the housing puts them in that connective, supportive environment. The Grow Urban Farm and our Working Toward the Future puts them in a work acclimation where they can become spiritually, emotionally ready, right? And then give them all the time they need, right, in an environment that is going to proliferate them staying on the path that they want to get to. So that's so great. And it's great to have those mechanisms in place, for them.
Okay. Well, I know we are getting towards the end of our segment. I think we just have like 2 minutes left. So I would like to just throw a quick question to Michelle. Could you tell us from an employer's perspective, what do you see as the path forward?
Well, again, it's just collaborating with organizations and educating ourselves. Are you referring to the reentry into the workforce, Kathy?
Well, yes, as we're talking about recovery and reentry as an employer, what are you looking forward to as we move forward to keep your strong workforce?
Yeah, I just think we need to continue what we're doing. We've identified the needs, but as I was listening to Jeff and Jen speak, it always comes to my mind, one of our initiatives are to educate our staff, right, on such things that were mentioned, like trauma, and we need to be educated on addiction and Because yeah, we do have we don't know everyone that comes in has struggled or who has struggled with addiction, right? Just as I think Jen mentioned, we don't know not everyone's history. So I think moving forward, it's just really important that one of the first things that we do is to really get our staff educated on some of these topics that were specifically mentioned today.
Okay, and I think that's where we're going to have to leave it at this time. Thank you so much. Our panelists, you did a wonderful job. And I just wanted to direct everyone to get back to the main stage. You'll have to X out of this screen and go back to where we originally were. And we're going to be having a discussion on water in Appalachia. So thank you so much to the panelists and for everyone who is participating in the conference.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you.